The first thing that we're going to be touching on is the parts of the violin and the parts of the bow. This is the scroll. The scroll decorates the violin. If we did not have a scroll, the violin would still play the same way. Right below the scroll are the pegs. We have 4 black pegs and they tune the instrument. Please do not let your child tune these pegs or turn them, because if they do, they'll either make them go really, really loose and they'll fall off the bridge, or they'll make them go really, really tight and the string will break. Right below the pegs is the black fingerboard. When we start to put the violin up and play with our fingers will lie right on the fingerboard to make the notes. Right above the fingerboard are the strings. I tell all of the kids that they should memorize this saying so they know the order of the strings. Good, dogs, all, eat. And we have G, D, A, and E. In their lesson, I go in and out of order. It would be a good idea to do this at home also. Right below the strings is the bridge. The bridge holds up the strings. I have a short story to tell you. If your bridge comes down, if your student's bridge come down, please bring it back to me, because this bridge stays up from the tightness of the strings. I had a student a long time ago have their parents glue the bridge back onto the violin. The violin bridge is not glued onto the violin. It stays up from the tightness of the strings. Right next to the bridge is called the F-holes. This is where the sound actually comes out of the violin. As I pluck it, you hear the sound coming out of both of these F-holes. There are no other holes in the violin. Right below the strings and the F-holes are the fine tuners. Mrs. Hill only has 1 fine tuner, but you're going to notice on your child's violin that there's going to be 4 fine tuners. The fine tuner tunes the violin string if it's just a little bit out of tune, just like the pegs do. They also should not play with those fine tuners. Right below the fine tuners is called the tailpiece. The tailpiece helps hold the strings in place. And right below the tailpiece is called the end button. The end button actually holds that tailpiece in place. On your part chart that I send home with your child, they call this a chin rest. But I changed it to a jaw rest, because when you put the violin up on your shoulder, your jaw is actually sitting on the jaw rest, not your chin. So we're going to call this the jaw rest. Right here are called the ribs. The ribs are cut out of the violin so that when we play the violin, our bow doesn't bang into the sides of the wood. You see how that works? If you flip the violin over, this is the back of the violin. These are the shoulders of the violin, just like we have shoulders. This is the neck of the violin, just like we have a neck. And right above the last piece, you're not going to be able to see it very well, but this long fingerboard has this raised part at the end. It's called the nut. And the nut is there. Doesn't look like any nut that I've ever seen, but the nut is there to raise the fingerboard up so that when you put your fingers down, it actually pushes the strings down to the fingerboard. If the nut was not there, the strings would be flat against the fingerboard. And that is all of the parts of the violin. We are now going to go on to the parts of the bow. The bow has horsehair on it. This is actually taken from a real horse. They cut the tail. It usually comes to the violin maker either black and or brown. They bleach it to this color, which is off-white. Right below this horsehair is called the frog. The frog is where we're going to be placing our hands when we learn how to hold the bow. The most important part of the bow is called the adjusting screw, and I want to point out why this is very important. Most kids take their bow and they leave it tight like this all the time. If you leave the bow hair tight like this all the time, it's like somebody pulling on your kid's hair all the time. Eventually, a glob of their hair is going to come out of their head. The same thing will happen to the bow hair. It will start to just break off. So when they put it away, they need to loosen this adjusting screw towards them, as if they're unloosening a jar of peanut butter. Loosening it towards them so that the hairs look like your hair on your head. When they take it out to play on the violin, they will go away from them to the right. They'll tighten it just enough so that their pinky can fit in the middle easily between the horsehair and the stick of the bow. It doesn't have to be very, very tight. Right above the frog is called the grip. Once again, our first finger and our second finger will be laying on the grip when we learn how to do the bow hold. Right above the grip is called the stick. Right above the stick is called the tip. And that is the parts of the bow.